plan as outlined to me was to form an organization of veterans, to use as a bluff, or as a club at least, to intimidate the government and break down our democratic institutions. The upshot of the whole thing was that I was supposed to lead an organization of 500,000 men, which would be able to take over the functions of government.
That the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. I have a dream today.
Your body went to sleep, but your mind is still caught up in a warfare. Your mind is a battleground.
It's psychological warfare.
With AJ Norton.
Hello, everybody. It's a rainy day in Austin here today. Just got back with some Chipotle, and I thought while I was walking back, why don't I talk about one of the most undertaught, most missing keys of history, missing people in American history, definitely, and that is Smedley Darlington Butler. If you haven't heard of him, I had not heard of him either. Just like the Eisenhower podcast I did last episode, I had not really studied Eisenhower, but I never have really heard of Smedley Butler even uttered in the history books. And that I find so amazing because he's extremely important, and he is one of the oldest whistleblowers in America. I would call him the first, but my history is not good enough. But he is an original whistleblower, even bigger than, I guess, Eisenhower's military-industrial complex quote. He simply declared that war is a racket. And let me give you the quick bio on Smedley Butler. There's not much known about him, so it's pretty easy. Smedley Darlington Butler was a United States Marine Corps general, the highest ranked at the time, and at the time of his death, the most decorated Marine in U.S. history. During his 34 career as a Marine, he participated in military actions in the Philippines, China, in Central America, and the Caribbean during the Banana Wars and France in World War I. Butler later became an outspoken critic of U.S. wars and the consequences, as well as exposing the business plot and alleged plan to overthrow the U.S. government. I will get back to the business plot. That gets a little bit conspiratorial, but not many people know about the proposed business plot, which was a fascist coup to overtake FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt's government in 1933. And whether it actually happened or not is highly debated, but there definitely is artifacts that put proof forward that it did exist. And the sad truth is there's not a lot of proof out there, but there's at least a little bit of evidence instead of, a blind trust, which I'll get to. I guess the next paragraph is this. By the end of his career, Butler had received 16 medals, 5 for his heroism. He is one of 19 men to receive the Medal of Honor twice, one of 3 to be awarded both the Marine Corps' Brevet Medal and the Medal of Honor, and the only Marine to be awarded the Brevet Medal and 2 Medals of Honor, all for separate actions. So I believe he's one of 2 men to receive a Medal of Honor for different actions, so some people have received multiple Medals of Honor for one action. But, the most decorated at the time, not the most decorated today, but 2 Medals of Honor, still nobody has gotten more than that. But he's most notable, and I think this is why he's not taught a lot, because he's an anti-war guy, even for his legendary military record. I'm not an Army guy, but, these awards, I don't think many people accrue this much hardware. Not everything's about the championships. Not everyone's Michael Jordan, but he sure win a Medal of Honor is to put your life out on the line like that, right? In 1935, Butler wrote a book called War is a Racket, where he described and criticized the workings of the United States in its foreign actions and wars, such as those he was a part of, including the American corporations and other imperialist motivations behind them. After retiring from service, he became a popular activist, speaking at meetings organized by veterans, pacifists, and church groups in the 1930s. He died in 1940, so he lived from 1881 to 1940. So most of his life was a Marine. He was 34 years as a Marine. What a life. Here's a little clip of Ralph Nader describing Smedley Butler.
How many people here have ever heard of Smedley Butler? Huh? Here's the book. It's called War is a Racket. Now, Smedley Butler was a unique person. He was a brigadier general in the Marine Corps between roughly 1900 and 1933. He was the most decorated Marine officer in that period of American history, 2 Congressional Medal of Honors. And then he realized what he was doing. And he said, quote, "I spent 33 years in the Marines, most of my time being a high-class muscle man for big business, for Wall Street, and for the bankers. In short, I was a racketeer for capitalism." Then he goes into some detail, in addition to some very gruesome pictures about what war is like, with ironic titles, like A Field with Dead Soldiers, and under it is the title, Fields of Glory. Here's what he said, quote, "I helped make Mexico, especially Tampico, safe for American oil interests in 1914. I helped make Haiti and Cuba a decent place for the National City Bank boys to collect revenues in. I helped in the raping of half a dozen Central American republics for the benefit of Wall Street. The record of racketeering is long. I helped purify Nicaragua for the International Banking House of Brown Brothers in 1909 to 1912. I brought light to the Dominican Republic for American sugar interests in 1916. In China, I helped to see to it that Standard Oil went its way, unmolested," end quote. The Reader's Digest summarized this in those days. The Reader's Digest. I hardly saw a mention in my history book in high school to Smedley Butler. This book should be read by every Marine today. This war is more than significantly driven by oil interests, the third largest oil pool in the world.
Okay, so that was Nader, and he said it best. Obviously, the picture of Smedley Butler to draw is that, unlike some chicken hawks we've had at the top of our government, Henry Kissinger, Dick Cheney, possibly Donald Trump, people who really were never really experienced with war, and, you know, are very hawkish, very aggressive in their foreign policies. You have somebody who has an impeccable military record, Smedley Butler, calling war out, calling what he did, what he spent his life's work on, and what he was the best at, a farce, you know, a racket, essentially, a lie. And that is a very big deal to me, just because you could not smear him for being a bad veteran or being a bad military hero. He was one of the best medal-wise, got all the awards, was a great general. And so for him to blow the whistle, for him to teach people the reality of what they were supporting in World War I and in the Spanish-American War and other things like that, that this is when man has failed. Is when man has failed. When, you know, politics have failed, when agreements have failed, when, you know, negotiations have failed. We have resulted to the lowest of the low, killing each other. And he also, what he is mainly pointing out, as Ralph Nader points out, he finally wakes up to the fact that this was all for business. This killing and death and destruction was to make way for U.S. interests to own land, to own resources, to make money, essentially. And, you know, there's a profit in war, as my Eisenhower podcast, Eisenhower points out that for every bomber we make, that's a school that goes, you know, unfinished. That's a park that goes unmade, and things like that. And Smedley Butler doesn't say that in particular, but that's his point out, is who's making the profits? The people who are not fighting the war. Who's benefiting from the war? The people who fight the war, they die. They get our, you know, verbal support, but they get PTSD, you know, mental conditions their whole life. Obviously, the physical conditions go without saying, and he blows the whistle on his whole life, and that demands a lot of courage. In that, I think he actually was able to be very introspective and look at himself and say, how am I living my life, and what can I do to make my life better? And it took him a while. He won a lot of awards, and that's something I think is very hard for anyone in any area of life, is to turn on the system that made them a hero. So he was a legend, 2-time Medal of Honor. You know, from the system which he was in, which was the U.S. military, he garnered all the praise, all the, you know, legendary status, most decorated Marine, for him to turn his head, for him to actually question the system that feeds him, to bite the hand that feeds him, war, his military record, what he's doing in these countries later in life, is very difficult, because your question, it's just like when I see these news corporations, we have corporate news essentially, CNN, MSNBC, Fox. Why don't they talk about climate change? Well, a lot of fossil fuels pay for their advertising. For them to talk about that is to bash out against fossil fuels. It goes deeper than that, but essentially, I don't think they harp on a lot of corporate power in the corporate media, because who funds them? The corporations. They don't talk about, lots of pieces on Monsanto, ExxonMobil, Ford, GE, and all these companies, and they don't even talk about, how there's only 6 major media companies that own 90% of what we read, write, and hear in America. And so that's where my deepest respect for him goes, is that he whistle blew and he toured the country reading his book, War is a Racket. And I'm going to read a few pieces of this. If you just Google War is a Racket, it's online. It's a very short book. It's 5 chapters. And the man throws all the punches he can. He gets right down to the point. He is, Major General. I love that name, Smedley Butler. I think you kind of think smelly at the beginning, but I think it's a really cool name. He's a hero, And his first chapter, I'm going to read a little bit of it to you guys, so this podcast actually has some length, some strength, and hopefully you're not too bored from me rambling on for 4 hours. But if you want to hear me ramble more, you can go on my Patreon page on psychowarfare.com/Patreon and contribute. Oh, look at that plug. Look at that plug. Talking about media, why don't you support us? Chapter 1, War is a Racket. War is a racket. It always has been, Smedley Butler writes. It is possibly the oldest, easily the most profitable, surely the most vicious. It is the only one international in scope. That was true back in the day, but not true anymore, sadly. It is the only one in which the profits are reckoned in dollars and the losses in lives. That's true. A racket is best described, I believe, as something that is not what it seems to the majority of the people. Only a small inside group know what it is about. It is conducted for the benefit of the very few at the expense of the very many. Out of war, a few people make huge fortunes. In World War I, it's actually in parentheses 1, because when he wrote this, there only had been World War I, which they called the Great War at that time. A mere handful garnered the profits of the conflict. At least 21,000 new millionaires and billionaires were made in the United States during the World War. That many admitted their huge blood gains in the income tax returns. How many other war millionaires falsified their tax returns, no one knows. So I think he's just citing some stats here. Smedley Butler knows his numbers. And then, gosh, there's a lot. He writes a lot more. I don't know if I should read it all to you now that I'm thinking about how boring this can get. For a great many years as a soldier, I had suspicion that war was a racket. Not until I retired to civil life, but did I fully realize it. Now that I see the international war clouds gathering as they are today, I must face it and speak out. I guess he's talking about fascism in the 30s in Europe, which must have been a very odd time. I wonder if Europe is thinking the same thing about us today. Again, they are choosing sides. France and Russia met and agreed to stand side by side. Italy and Austria hurried to make a similar agreement. Poland and Germany cast sheep eyes at each other, forgetting for the nonce, one unique occasion, their dispute over the Polish corridor. I don't know what that means, guys. The assassination of King Alexander of Yugoslavia complicated matters. Yugoslavia and Hungary, long bitter enemies, were almost at each other's throats. Italy was ready to jump in, but France was waiting. So was Czechoslovakia. All of them are looking ahead to war, not the people, not those who fight and pay and die, not those who foment wars and remain safely at home to profit. Only those who foment wars and profit. So he's talking about how, again, what is a racket? It's an ill-conceived notion, a facade, if you will, a psychological warfare of the masses. I should try to incorporate that word into every one of my podcasts. And then he goes into a lot more statistics. Yes, they are getting ready for another war, he writes. Why shouldn't they? It pays high dividends. So he's walking, it's basically, what is war? It's almost the commodification of human beings. You turn a human being, a soldier, into money, where they have to pay for their boots, suits in blood, and bombers, which you gladly make and the government buys for them in blood. Chapter 2. Who makes the profits? The World War, rather our brief participation in it, has cost the United States some $52 billion. That's a lot of money for 1911 prices. Figure it out. That means $400 to every American man, woman, and child, and we haven't paid the debt yet. We are paying it, our children will pay it, and our children's children will probably still be paying the cost of that war. The normal profits of a business concern in the United States are 6, 8, 10, and sometimes 12%. But wartime profits, that is another matter. 20, 60, 100, 300, and even 1,800%. The sky is the limit. All that traffic will bear. Uncle Sam has the money. Let's get it. He's very outspoken, kind of trying to break the fourth wall, really attack you in his writing. He gives a lot more stats. He actually throws out a lot of stats for being a military guy. Utah copper, average of $5 million per year during the 1910 through 1914 period, jumped to an average of $21 million yearly profits on the war period. So Utah copper quadrupled their profits. And he goes into DuPont too, which was still a huge organization, still a 400 top 5 company. And he goes into, I read all of this, but I'm trying to think if he goes into anything else you guys want to see. You guys want to hear about, he talks about just so much money is made from war, and the cost is a human life, and essentially, who fights it? You do. It's an externality. So an externality, I think about this all the time now, is that essentially a company doesn't have to pay for the ripple effect of their actions. So, if you are the United Fruit Company and you want that land in Guatemala to grow fruit, and you lobby the government to take over that country or install a leader who's going to let you do that, a coup, they do not have to pay for the true cost of killing all the people, all the disruption they cause, all the lives they ruin. They simply pay for the income to make the profits, or the initial cost to make the profits, but they don't pay for the pollution of their actions, essentially. A better example, I guess, is oil. They don't pay for all the kids who get asthma, for instance. They don't pay for if they pollute a lake and then a fishing company fishes out of that lake. All those fish are poisoned, and then the people sue the fishing company instead of the fracking oil company. And I don't know, fracking doesn't. We'll see if the science on fracking becomes better in the future. Chapter 3, guys. Don't you love where I go on these podcasts? Who pays the bills? Chapter 3. Who provides the profits, these nice little profits of 20, 100, 300, 1,500, 1,800%? We pay them in taxation. We paid the bankers their profits when we bought Liberty bonds at $100 and sold them back at $84 or $86 to the bankers. These bankers collected 100 plus. It was a simple manipulation. The bankers controlled the security marts. It was easy for them to depress the price of these bonds. Then all of us, the people, got frightened and sold the bonds at $84, $86. The bankers bought them. Then those same bankers stimulated a boom, and government bonds went to par and above. Then the bankers collected their profits. So he's talking about money manipulation. That still happens today. Wall Street has never lost. That's one thing if you study last 100 years of American history. The military-industrial complex has never really gone away, and the bankers have never really gone away. Even though I would say the bankers were pretty subdued in the New Deal era, which would be 1930 to 1970. And it especially ended when Bill Clinton repealed Glass-Steagall in 1999, which caused the economy to crash 9 years later. And we're bubbling on one right now. Don't you love how positive this podcast is? A carbon bubble this time, I think. That's my insider knowledge. Divest, man. Divest from the fossil fuel industry. That's my tip of the day, guys. I should have some sound effects. I'm going to get a soundboard soon, guys. And then he goes on into chapter 4, which is how to smash this racket. Well, it's a racket, all right, Smedley Butler writes. A few profit and the many pay, but there is a way to stop it. You can't end it with disarmament conferences. You can't eliminate it by peace parleys at Geneva. Well-meaning but impractical groups can't wipe it out by resolutions. It can be smashed effectively only by taking the profit out of war. The only way to smash this racket is to conscript capital and industry and labor before the nation's manhood can be conscripted. 1 month before the government can conscript the young men of the nation, it must conscript capital and industry and labor. Let the officers and the directors and the high-powered executives of our armament factories and our munition makers and our shipbuilders and our airplane builders and the manufacturers of all the other things that provide profit in wartime, as well as the bankers and the speculators, be conscripted to get a $30 a month, the same wage as the lads of the trenches get. So if we are going to collectively go to war, he says, then it's a group effort. No one benefits and everyone bears the cost. Actually, I think that's the better way to put it, is that everyone bears the true cost of war. Let the workers in these plants get the same wages, all the workers, all presidents, all executives, he goes on forever, all managers, all bankers, yes, and all generals, and all admirals, and all officers, and all the politicians, and all government office holders. Whoa. Everyone in the nation must be restricted to a total monthly income not to exceed that paid to the soldier in the trenches. So, if you're a businessman, if you really support the war, you're willing to get paid to take the same sacrifice as that soldier monetarily, at least, right? Let all these kings and tycoons and masters of business and all these workers in industry and all our senators and governors and majors pay half of their monthly $30 wage to their families and pay their war risk insurance and buy Liberty bonds. Why wouldn't they? They aren't running any risk of being killed or having their bodies mangled or their minds shattered. They aren't sleeping in muddy trenches. They aren't hungry. The soldiers are. Okay, so their money should be redirected to helping the soldiers, and we should all take a low wage. He also talks something about, I think this is the real concept of smash the racket, but I really like obviously take out the economic incentive for war, and that's the first part. And the second part basically is another step, he writes, in this fight is to smash the war racket in the limited mind to determine whether a war should be declared. A plebiscite, not at all the voters, but merely of those who would be called upon to do the fighting and dying. They wouldn't be very much sense in having a 76-year-old president of a munitions factory or the flat-footed head of an international banking firm or the cross-eyed manager of a uniform manufacturing plant, all of whom see visions of a tremendous profits in the event of war, voting on whether the nation should go to war or not. They never would be called upon to shoulder arms, to sleep in a trench, and to be shot. Only those who should be able to called upon to risk their lives for their country should have the privilege of voting to determine whether the nation should go to war. So instead of having, it used to be Congress had to issue wartime calls, but now it's a little bit shifted more to the president, where he's done a lot of things. He hasn't asked Congress for approval in the past. But he's saying, fuck that. Let's have everyone who's going to die, going to fight, vote on the war. Because I agree with that. That makes such sense. Because the only reason anyone's going to vote for a war who fights it is if they actually face extinction. If they feel that there is some other side that is so against them that, if they don't do this, they're going to die. If they're peaceful, they're going to die the other way. And I think that really sets it apart. Let the people who fight the war vote if they're going to go to war. Makes complete sense. I would take it another way, where everyone who votes no doesn't get to fight. Only the people who want to go to the war get to go. It's a choice. And I guess also building that on top of the economic incentives he talks about paying everyone the same wage in wartime, would be a huge also motivation to, demotivation, a de-incentive to anti-incentive, really, to not go to war. And he says, to summarize, 3 steps must be taken to smash the war racket. We must take the profit out of war. We must permit the youth of the land who would bear arms to decide whether or not there should be war. 3, we must limit our military forces to home defense purposes. That's another big thing he wrote about. So the ships in our Navy, it can be seen, should be specifically limited by law to within 200 miles of our coastline. Had that been the law in 1898, that the Maine would never have gone to Havana Harbor. She would never have been blown up. There would never go to war with Spain, with its intended loss of life. 200 miles is ample in the operation of experts for defense purposes. Our nation cannot start an offensive war if its ships can't go further than 200 miles from the coastline. Planes might be permitted to go as far as 500 from the coast for purposes of reconnaissance, and the Army should never leave the territorial efforts of our nation. Territorial limits. So he's talking about, okay, pass a constitutional amendment to just do defense. So our Department of Defense can actually be for defense. The DOD can be for defense and not offense. So those three together, I definitely think that one, obviously, if you just pass that one, hey, we only go to war if someone attacks us. Maybe then, the businessmen will say, hey, incentivize people to attack us. Chapter 5 is to hell with war. And it's another good chapter. It's a really short book, and he drives home the point so easily. I'm not a fool as to believe that war is a thing of the past. I know that people do not want war, but there is no use in saying we cannot be pushed into another war. Smedley Butler, we died 1940, so he was alive for World War II. He just didn't see the U.S. get into it. Looking back, Woodrow Wilson was reelected president in 1916, he writes, on a platform that he had kept us out of the war and on the implied promise that he would keep us out of war. Yet 5 months later, he asked Congress to declare war on Germany. In that 5-month interval, the people had not been asked whether they had changed their minds. The 400,000 young men had put on uniforms and marched or sailed away were not asked whether they wanted to go forth to suffer and die. Then what has caused the government to change its mind so suddenly? Money, he writes. An Allied commission, it may be recalled, came over shortly before the war declarations and called on the president. The president summoned a group of advisors. The head of the commission spoke, stripped to its diplomatic language. This is what he told the president and his group. There is no use kidding ourselves any longer. The cause of the Allies is lost. We now owe you, American bankers, American munitions, $5 or $6 billion. If we lose, and without the help of the United States, we must lose. We, England, France, and Italy, cannot pay back the money, and Germany won't. So he's talking about how, basically we got into World War I because trade was threatened. Trade was threatened between all these countries, and they would be going bankrupt. And the bankers, the money they owe the bankers, munition workers, manufacturers, they wouldn't be able to pay back. And so the U.S. got involved. Had secrecy been outlawed as far as war negotiations were concerned, and had the press been invited to be present at that conference, or had radio been available to broadcast the proceedings, America would have never entered the World War. But this conference, like all war discussions, was shrouded in utmost secrecy. When our boys were sent off to war, they were told it was a war to make the world safe for democracy and a war to end all wars. So there you go. They infused the patriotism with our country and the fact that we're spreading democracy, when in fact we may be expanding tyranny. 18 years later, after the war 18 years later, he writes, the war has less of democracy than it had been. Besides, what business is it of ours, whether Russia or Germany or England or France or Italy or Austria live under democracies or monarchies, whether they are fascists or communists? Our problem is to preserve our own democracy. Something we have not done, Smedley Butler. He's right, though. He says, I guess his problem with, taking care of defense, he says, we have problems here. We can't even take care of ourselves. Why do we have to get in everyone else's business? And the reason is because we're an empire, not a democracy. The chief aim of any power at any of these conferences has not been to achieve disarmament to prevent war, but rather to get more armament for itself and less for any potential foe. There is only one way to disarm any semblance of practicability. That is for all nations to get together and scrap every ship, every gun, every rifle, every tank, every warplane. Even this, if it were possible, would not be enough. The next war, according to experts, will be fought not with battleships, not by artillery, not with rifles, and not with machine guns. It will be fought with deadly chemicals and gases. He's pretty much right. That was more in Vietnam, and now it's even accelerated. It'll be fought with technology, the next war, if we have one. Secretly, each nation is studying and perfecting newer and ghastlier means of annihilating its foes wholesale. Yes, ships will continue to be built, and the shipbuilders must take their profits, and guns will be manufactured, and powder and rifles will be made, for the munitions makers must make their huge profits, and the soldiers, of course, of course, must wear uniforms, for the manufacturer must make the war profits too. But victory or defeat will be determined by the skill and ingenuity of our scientists. If we put them to work making poison gas and more fiendish mechanical and explosive instruments of destruction, they will have no time for the constructive job of building greater prosperity for all people. By putting them to the useful job, we can all make money out of peace than we can out of war, even the munition makers. So I say, to hell with war. And that is the great Smedley Butler. That is his book he toured around in the 1930s after he retired as a general in 1933. Now, he is also known for something else I'm going to talk about, which is the business plot, is what it's called. It's known as the business plot of the White House coup. If you look at the Wikipedia page online, there is not much info about it. I will quickly read the Wikipedia page. It was an alleged political conspiracy in 1933 in the United States. Smedley Butler claims that wealthy businessmen were plotting to create a fascist veterans organization with Butler as its leader to use in a coup d'etat to overthrow FDR. In 1934, Butler testified before the Congressional State House of Representatives Special Committee on un-American activities. On these claims, no one was prosecuted. So I'm going to play you his congressional testimony. I believe it's the only clip of Smedley Butler ever talking, and let's do it. It's very short. It's only a minute.
The government and break down our democratic institutions. The upshot of the whole thing was that I was supposed to lead an organization of 500,000 men, which would be able to take over the functions of government. I talked with an investigator for this committee who came to me with a subpoena on Sunday, November 18th. He told me they had unearthed evidence linking my name with several such veteran organizations. As it then seemed to me to be getting serious, I felt it was my duty to tell all I knew of such activities to this committee. My main interest in all this is to preserve our democratic institution. I want to retain the right to vote, the right to speak freely, and the right to write. If we maintain these basic principles, our democracy is safe. No dictatorship can exist with suffrage, freedom of speech, and press.
Okay, so that's the only audio clip I ever heard. That's when he posted it in Congress. And he simply talks about what he was worried about, in that he was worried about a fascist dictatorship. Now, as for the players in this, he talks about the actual players, the names. The Wall Street financiers include Guarantee Trust Director Grayson Murphy, J.P. Morgan, and DuPont Interest, Remington Arms, and other allegedly involved in the plot attempt. Even today, in 1975, a full transcripts of the hearings cannot be traced. So that clip is a lot of what we have. At the time of the incidents, news media at first reported on the plot earnestly, then quickly changed course and dismissed the plot. For instance, the New York Times newsroom gave the plot front-page coverage until a New York editorial characterized as a gigantic hoax. While historians have questions how close the coup actually got to execution, most agree that some sort of wild scheme was contemplated and discussed. So whether they were going to do it the day before, I didn't explain that. The big thing about the coup is that it was believed that they had amassed a 5,000 or 500,000 workforce soldiers to coup the government, the DuPonts, the financiers, and they were simply looking for somebody to head the coup, and they looked for someone in the military. Well, who's the most decorated and well-known? It's Smedley Darlington Butler. And so they asked him, and he blew the whistle, and he reported to Congress. So at least the story from that general concept makes sense. Is who would you ask? You would ask the most decorated at the time to coup the government and replace FDR. And this was believed. It also makes sense. Why would they want to do FDR? Because they were, combating his socialist policies, that goddamn Social Security, making sure old people can actually live and don't die of poverty after working their whole life. But that's Smedley Butler. That's some great clips from him. I'm going to end this, guys, here. Hopefully this is good. If you guys like the show, please give on Patreon. I'm going to try to do some special podcasts only to be here. And I've got some great podcasts coming up about economics. I'm trying to read more. I'm going to do one on Chomsky. Still trying to get him on the podcast one day. One goddamn day, guys. And I hope you're doing good. I hope you realize what you truly like in life. Like you like to grow communities. I hope you know, enjoy your job. And I hope we realize, you know, our connection to each other. I think that's really important. And have a great day, everyone, and enjoy. And if you gave a review on iTunes, I would love you so, so much more. Have a great day, guys.